You're listening to the Live Ultra Podcast, a show dedicated to exploring the minds of the individuals who take on the world's most extreme challenges. Now, here's your host, Jack Middleton.
Hello and welcome to episode 2 of the Ultra Podcast. I'm your host, Jack Middleton, and in today's episode it's going to be a special one because today I'm going to be covering my Ironman 70.3 Dún Laoghaire Experience 2019. I'm going to cover the story from start to finish. I'm not going to hold anything back, and I'm going to be as honest and open about both the highs and the lows for training, for completing the event, and I'm not going to hold anything back. So for context, I would suggest going back and listening to episode 1, if this is the first episode that you're listening to, just to kind of give you an understanding of, what the podcast is about, and also what's led me up to this point previously. Now, to summarize what I'm going to be covering specifically in this episode, I've got a few bullet points here. So, first of all, I'm going to be covering the journey to the start line. Really delving into why I signed up back in January. From there, then, I'm going to be looking at and talking about the physical training and the program that I actually followed and developed, and then what a typical week actually looked like. Leading on from that, I'm going to be delving into mindset training. Also, a highly important part of actually training for endurance events is the mindset side of things. And it's something that I think people often overlook when training for endurance events. So I wanted to give it a full section in today's episode discussing the things that I did to train my mind for this specific race. I'll touch briefly on the cause that I actually raced for and the charity that I supported. And then of course I'll delve into the actual race. So, without further ado, let's jump straight in from the start. So, as I mentioned, I wanted to start from the very start. So, not from the start line, not from, the start of the race. I actually wanted to start way back in January of this year, so 2019, to the moment that caused me to start this journey in the first place, and really understand and give you guys an understanding, or give you an understanding specifically of why I signed up to my first Ironman 70.3, and then obviously why specifically I chose to do the Ironman in Dún Laoghaire. So if we take a look back to January, say it was probably mid-January, it's probably just after my birthday, towards the end of January, and if I'm being fully honest, and this is really what this whole podcast is about, I'm going to try and be as honest and open. And if I am being honest, I wasn't in a good place mentally. I wasn't in a good place mentally or financially. I really just felt like I was stuck in a rut. And this is down to finishing college that previous October. And I'd actually moved back in with my parents from graduating, and I was really just trying to figure out my life, but I didn't really feel like I was making any progress, if that makes sense. I'd wake up and I'd write down some ideas, but none of them really stood out to me, and nothing really seemed to make sense. There was a lot of brain fog there and not really much clarity in terms of where I actually wanted to go in my life and what I actually wanted to be doing, and it wasn't a good place to be honest. And that's really how I was feeling around this time. Now, I was very fortunate to meet a woman called Marie Breen back in November, and she planted the seed about completing an Ironman. She's an incredible woman, fought cancer in her 60s and bounced back to then go on to complete not one but multiple full distance Ironmans, and even qualified for the mecca of Ironman racing, and got the chance to race at the Ironman World Championships in Kona in Hawaii. So I had a chance to meet her for a coffee, and yeah, like she just fully opened my mind to, the possibility of completing an Ironman. It was always something at the back of my mind, but she really planted the seed to, push myself and go for one within the next 12 months to a year. So after that conversation, I didn't really think much of it. Didn't really have the finances in line to be able to invest in the equipment and sign up for the race. But if we fast forward to January, my whole mindset behind not being able to figure out my life and not really having much clarity, I thought back to that conversation, and I thought back to how Marie had almost turned her life around from a far more severe state of ill health or misfortune than I was currently in, where she had battled cancer, and she had completely transformed her life. And how she had done that is through Ironman. So I basically took that philosophy and said, do you know what? I'm not in the best place right now, but what I'm going to do is I'm going to sign up to an Ironman. Now, I didn't sign up to the full distance, even though Maria suggested that I sign up to Ironman Cork, which was Ireland's first full distance Ironman that following July. Keeping in mind this is in January now, so I didn't feel like, number one, I had enough time to train for the full Ironman, and number two, I didn't feel like I would enjoy the experience if I was going to be suffering from start to finish. Plus, I just thought I'd injure myself. Honestly, like, when I made this decision to get into doing Ironmans and endurance, I have the intention, and I still have the intention, to be doing this as long as possible. I'm in this for the long run, and I just didn't see it making sense to go from 0 to full Ironman in 6 months. I thought it was an overwhelming amount of pressure to put on myself, and since I was still trying to figure out other things in my life, what made the most sense to me was doing Ironman 70.3 Dún Laoghaire, which is the half distance, so 1.9 kilometer swim, 90 kilometer bike, and a half marathon at the end. Still an incredible challenge, but one that I thought that I could manage, and one that I thought would really help me to build that foundation of getting the training right, getting the nutrition right, identifying what works and what doesn't, getting the mindset right. And the whole reason, my whole why behind all of this, besides choosing a specific distance that was in line with what I wanted to achieve, it was really about getting me back on track, getting that passion back in my life, getting that clarity of purpose, and having something to keep you on track and get you out of bed in the morning. It's such an important thing to have in your life, and at that time I didn't have that thing in my life. So in terms of that biggest reason why I was doing this, it really came down to purpose. It really came down to wanting to get my life on track, getting out of that rut, getting clarity again, and getting the ball rolling. And that's exactly what I did. I walked down to the credit union, emptied what remained of my savings account, and pretty much signed up to Ironman Dún Laoghaire. Now, obviously, as soon as you sign up for something, it makes it very real, and that obviously leads me on to my next point, where it was time to start making a game plan to train for this thing. So shortly after I signed up, other things in my life started to get moving, and I started to create that momentum where I decided to move to Dublin, and that's where I'm based now, to start working in sales full time. So this was my first real job after leaving college, first real time actually, looking after myself and taking care of myself. And based on the fact that obviously I was in college, but I wasn't fully looking after myself. I was still very fortunate to have the support of my parents to help me with rent and things like that. But this was my first real experience of moving away from home, working a full-time job, paying the bills, all these things, all these real world responsibilities. So based on all of that, I knew that I needed to build a training plan around my life instead of my life around my training plan. That's a philosophy that I've come to know and love over these last 10 months of this journey, and that's exactly what I did. So I did some research online, and I basically combined different training programs to build one that would allow me to get to the start line, get across the finish line, get that medal, but in a reasonable time, in a time and fitness level that I enjoy it and be able to push myself and challenge myself, versus just being able to just about finish. I didn't want to be that person who just about finished and suffered from start to finish. Don't get me wrong, I wanted to challenge myself and I wanted to test myself, but I wanted to build that foundation that would allow me to build up to the full Ironman distance. So yeah, that's what I did. It was basically a hybrid training plan that was a mix between having that competitive edge but also being able to just finish. It was like a happy medium between those two elements. So what I developed was a 30-week training plan that required about an average of 10 hours per week, give or take. Obviously some weeks were better than others, but this was in contrast to other training plans that I researched, where if you were looking to compete and rank highly in your age group, you'd be looking at about 13 hours per week on average over the 30 weeks. That's a big difference over time. Like that's an extra, you're looking at an extra 12 hours per month. So I mean, it's a big jump up. Now, in contrast, on the lower scale of things, if I was looking to just finish, the training plans that I was researching were coming in at around 7 hours on average per week over the 30 weeks. So yeah, the plan, like I said, I developed was sitting in at around 10 hours per week. It's a nice happy medium between the two, and it incorporated 3 main phases that I'm going to jump into now. The first phase being the base phase. So each phase is 10 weeks long. For the base phase, the real goal is to condition the body for the training over the course of the entire 30 weeks. So there's a few things that you're really looking to do in this 10-week period. The first thing is to establish an aerobic base. That's really about getting your cardiovascular moving, and you're building up your respiratory system to handle that consistent training that you're going to be doing over that 30-week period. And also, this is a time where you can really develop your technique. So it's important to get your technique and your form right from the start, especially in things like your running, where I think you're more prone to injury. It's really important to get that technique right from the start and get that technique really nailed in the first 10 weeks to make those subsequent 20 weeks easier and more efficient. But overall, to summarize, the base phase is just about essentially giving the body a chance to adapt, prevent injury, and help build that really solid base, that solid foundation that's going to propel you forward and make that race more manageable. The second phase of the training program that I developed was the build phase. 10 weeks long again. This time the goal is build strength and also build speed on top of that base phase that we've already developed. So as I gradually increase my training sessions, both in terms of time and intensity, I'm obviously building on this foundation that I've already established in that base phase. Now, I also incorporated a test day towards the end of this 10-week block for a chance to get that experience of being in race conditions. So what I did was a 1.5k ocean swim, 40k bike up and around the Wicklow Mountains, and a 10k run back to back to back. So this was, like I said, a chance to test out some gear, test out where I was at with my training, and give the body and the mind a chance to experience race conditions. Because it's all well and good training in the pool, running on the treadmill, and doing things or cycling indoors. They're not a true representation of race day environment. So it's important to build those test sessions in where you're getting a feel for that actual like real race environment, if that makes sense. It's super important, and I made sure to incorporate that towards the end of my build phase. Now leading on to the peak phase. The peak phase is the third phase of the training plan that I developed for the Ironman 70.3. And this is another 10-week phase. It's the final phase. And the goal here is really to build up intensity and volume for the first 5 weeks. So for the first half of the peak phase. And then gradually begin to taper and condition the body for race day for the second half of the peak phase. And those are the final 5 weeks coming into the race. So the peak phase, it was really important for me, and especially the tapering aspect, because up until that point, I'd been training hard. I had been pretty disciplined in terms of sticking to sessions. Obviously some weeks were better than others, but you can't beat yourself up over that. But also what I incorporated for this phase was something that's known as brick sessions. So for anybody who doesn't know what a brick session is, it usually pairs 2 disciplines in race environment, and these are typically more intense sessions than you'd have during the week. So an example of a brick session that I would have done in this 5 week peak phase, for the first 5 weeks, I would have done a 2k ocean swim down around the area that the race was going to be taking place, and I would have followed that by a 90k long bike ride in the Wicklow Mountains. So these typically would have taken me around 5 to 6 hours. So it was a long day of training, but they were crucial. Like we'll come to it in the race section, but these brick sessions I found super valuable for building my confidence and for also giving me a realistic expectation of how my body and mind was going to perform when it came to the race day. So yeah, it's just a really good chance to give it a go and test yourself and see where you're really at with your training, instead of wondering where you're actually at with your training. And that's really what it looked like. So the 3 phases again were the base phase, build phase, and peak phase, 30 weeks long. And yeah, that final 5 weeks of the peak phase was really about decreasing volume, decreasing intensity, and letting the body fully grow and repair, so that by the time it was time for race day, I was fully ready to go, in theory. But we'll get into why I wasn't exactly in full health leading into race day. Just to elaborate a little bit more and wrap this training section up, I just wanted to give you guys a example of what a typical training week would look like. So I've just pulled a week from my training plan and I'm just going to read it out. So Monday was a rest day for me. Tuesday would have been a swim in the pool and then a run for an hour, usually outside. I didn't really do much treadmill running. Wednesday was a bike ride for about 45 minutes. That then led into a run for 15 minutes. Thursday was typically a swim in the pool followed by a bike session for an hour. Friday, swim in the pool again, run, probably about 5-10k. Saturday was a full rest day. I like to take the Saturday off, sleep in, let the body recover from the week. And this also had me going into the brick sessions, which were probably the toughest sessions of the week. feeling fully fresh and fully recovered. And as I mentioned, a typical brick session would have looked at 2k ocean swim followed by a 50 to 90k long bike ride. And that's really what a typical training week would look like. Averaging out at that 10 hours per week across the 30 weeks, that's typically what a training week looked like. Now, the mindset training routine. This is a section that I'm really excited to chat about, just based on the fact that I love the mindset side of things as much, if not more, than physical training side of things. So there's a few key areas and key points that I wanted to discuss that I use to train my mind, and then obviously some points and some takeaways that you can specifically do to implement these things into your own mindset training routine. So the first thing that I was very good at sticking to was meditation. I would have meditated 10 minutes every morning, first thing when I got out of bed, before checking my phone or social media. And before I explain how I meditated, I just want to give you an understanding of, what meditation really is for me. I want to give you an analogy. So I see meditation as going to the gym for your mind. Just as you go to the gym or you go for a run or you go to the pool to get faster and stronger, your mind is the same thing. You need to train your mind, and you need to see the different ways that you can train your mind as going to the gym for your mind. Now, to link this analogy with the computer analogy, which is another really powerful way of seeing training your mind, and specifically around meditation, is if you imagine that your mind is like a computer. All this information coming in all day long, all these tabs open on different areas of your life and different problems that you're always trying to solve throughout the day. Look at meditation as a way to reboot your computer system off your mind, to refresh, to close all the tabs and start again. And that's really what meditation is for me. So what I actually do to meditate is I listen to what are known as binaural beats. You'll see them on YouTube. I'll link some in the show notes that I've found value from. And it's a 10-minute practice for me where I'll focus on the breath, focus on calming my mind, and focus on doing nothing. That's really what meditation is in its most fundamental state. And anytime my mind wanders during the meditation, I'll then return to the breath and really just focus on staying present, letting go of any worries or stresses that I might have had from the previous day or that I'm anticipating for the future day. It just really helps me to reset, reboot, and restart fresh going into the day. It's a very simple practice, but it's not easy. And it's very important to understand that meditation isn't easy and it's very tough to do. But like anything, what's uncomfortable early becomes comfortable later. Leading on from my meditation practice, I like to go into gratitude. And I like to have that journal beside my desk after I've meditated with a pen ready so that I can get that journal out and write down 3 new things that I'm grateful for going into that day. It could be something that happened yesterday or something that I'm looking forward to that day that I'm grateful for. But I just like to take some time to write down those 3 things in detail, just briefly, not too much detail, to just take a moment and give gratitude. And that really helps me to set my energy going into the day and set my intention going into the day. And it just really helps to put me in a good mood, if I'm being honest. So that's gratitude, and that's what I do. People have different ways of doing it, but that's what I did on a regular basis leading up to the Ironman to train my mind. Now, visualization it's a point you'll hear me discuss regularly throughout my content and throughout the podcast episodes that will proceed. I just wanted to touch on briefly how I use visualization specifically to complete the Ironman 70.3. So, first of all, I found the logo of the race and printed that off as a single page, stuck that on my wall. Secondly, I found an image of somebody who was at the finish line for this race last year and who was cheering and celebrating having just completed the race. These two images, every day that I would finish meditating and practicing gratitude, I would look at these images and imagine what it would feel like for me to complete this race specifically, and what emotions I would feel, the sense of achievement that I would feel, all of these things. And that's really how I practiced visualization on a daily basis for that specific goal. It's very simple stuff, but it's incredibly powerful when you can actually see what your goal looks like and you can see what succeeding at your goal looks like. And like everything, these little things done daily, compounded over time, or compounded leading up to an event such as an Ironman, they make a big difference. And they made a big difference for me, especially when the tough times presented themselves in the race, which we'll get into. Now, I wanted to touch briefly on the cause that we raise money and awareness for. So, part of my reason for doing the race, it had a different aspect to it. So, the cause that I chose to raise money for those who are and aren't familiar, was Samaritans Ireland. Now, you're probably wondering, why Samaritans? So, the reason I chose Samaritans is because I resonate very strongly with their message. You know, having suffered from mental health myself and still suffering to a certain degree today. Obviously, I'm in a lot better place now. But I've also had a lot of close people in my family and friends and circle suffer from, you know, symptoms of mental health and all of the problems and issues that come along with that. And, you know, it just came down to the point when I was looking back to January when I signed up to the Ironman Dún Laoghaire, and I was feeling really low. You know, I've already kind of touched briefly on it, and I've already given you an idea of how I was feeling, but I was definitely feeling the symptoms of somebody who was depressed, somebody who couldn't really see any light at the end of the tunnel. It's very easy to dig yourself into these kind of ruts, and nobody can really talk you out of it unless it's yourself. That's what I found anyway. I mean, you know, when somebody just tells you to cheer up, it's not exactly the best advice when you are in that lonely kind of dark place where you can't really see the positives. But, you know, obviously, like I said, I'm very fortunate to be in a much better place now, and as I trained and as I got the ball rolling in other areas of my life and had the systems in place to obviously deal with my own mental struggles, I wanted to help others and to raise awareness for this charity, specifically Samaritans. Just because I understand that I'm obviously in a very fortunate position to be able to do these things, and obviously now to share these learnings and these lessons, and I just wanted to give back. Honestly, I was trying to find that thing where I could give back, because I've always wanted to obviously help people and find out a way that was in line with what I believed in, and I never really, you know, found that thing or that cause that I could fully resonate with. But since I've had my own struggles, and since I've seen people close to me have their own struggles when it came to mental health, Samaritans just seemed like such a powerful charity that I wanted to get behind and raise some money and raise some awareness. And that's exactly what I did. Now, I think I raised about €500. It's not a huge amount of money, but that money that I raised went a long way, helping the charity to continue to do what they do. And it just came down to the fact as well that a lot of those guys that are in there helping these people through this charity, it's all voluntary. The majority are volunteering, they're not getting paid for it. And it's just a really great cause. And that was just another aspect that I wanted to incorporate into this journey and really help drive that purpose on when there was days that I didn't feel like it. And obviously days when I couldn't really see the light. Because there was days like that, and it just added more fuel to my why and more fuel to my purpose to see this go through to the very end. Now leading on to the long-awaited and much anticipated race day. So before I actually jump into how the race went, I want to give some context as to the month before I was ready to race. So basically what happened was about a month out, I was about 4 weeks out, I was actually cycling home, and for anybody who knows Dublin, the Lewis lines are absolutely treacherous as soon as it starts raining. And what happened was, as I was cycling over the Lewis line, the tram line, the bike wheel, my front wheel, just flipped from underneath me. I went straight over the handlebars, landed on my hand. Handlebars crushed into my hand. It wasn't pretty. It wasn't pretty in any shape or form. And to be honest, I thought I broke my hand. 4 weeks out, it's not really ideal to be trying to deal with a broken hand on top of all the other, I suppose, worries of how the race was going to go. But luckily I went straight to A&E and they said it wasn't broken. But it was badly bruised, and it did mean 2 weeks off, no training. That 2 weeks off, to be honest, really did set me back more mentally than physically. At this point, I'd obviously done a lot of training and I'd stuck pretty closely to the plan. So physically, I don't think I lost out on too much progress. But mentally, not being able to train, that started to get to me in week 2. Week 1 wasn't too bad, but week 2 I was starting to kind of feel a bit apprehensive about not being able to train so close to the race. But look, it was what it was. I was super grateful it happened 4 weeks out, where I still had that 2 weeks to recover to full health. But when I did go back training, it did take that extra week to build up the strength in the hand. I had to do exercises, and especially for the swim sessions, that was the bit I was most concerned about. That did take a week to kind of build up back to about 70 to 80% full strength. But yeah, just wanted to mention that to you. It's one of those things that happened, and it was part of the journey to the start line, and it wasn't ideal, but like most things, you just have to accept them and move on. And that's pretty much what I did. Now, having had that happen, I thought, right, it's just a matter of healing up, getting fresh over these next 2 weeks, getting in that last bit of training, and we're at the start line. We've made it. We've made it to the much anticipated Ironman Dún Laoghaire start line 2019. Long and behold, the brick session, sea swim that I did the week before, I contracted a bacterial infection from the contaminated water. Now, I didn't really know what it was until about the Thursday before the race. So literally went to CareDoc that night, which is like an emergency doctor. Cycled all the way there, cycled all the way back, and they gave me a prescription of antibiotics. I had an inclination of what it was because I had experienced the same thing in Indonesia, and I had got violently sick. I actually had to come home early from my trip in Indonesia because I had contracted this similar kind of bacterial infection from contaminated water. So to say that I wasn't going into this race in full health would have been an understatement. I was on antibiotics, pretty strong medication. But I mean, at this stage, there was no way I was not doing the race. There was just no way. I had trained too much, I had invested too much money, and I invested too much too much emotionally into this whole experience that I had to give it a go, no matter what. Whether I had to drop out because of not being fit and well mid-race because of some sickness, fair enough, but I at least wanted to give it a crack. So, began the antibiotics that night. Friday morning, I went to race registration in Dún Laoghaire, and that's where I had a chance to sign in, collect my official backpack, the race number, the transition bags. It was all becoming very real, very fast. And I also had the chance to attend the pre-race conference. Now, since this was my first ever Ironman with the Ironman brand, I like, this was all new to me. So the race conference was mandatory to basically discuss regulations, little things that could, make or break the race on the day, start times, cut-off times, obviously super important, and also what to expect out there. So the race coordinator was very honest in saying that it's a very fair course. It's not easy, it's not undoable, but the bit of the course to be wary of is the bike course. The bike course for Ironman Dún Laoghaire is one of the toughest on the circuit, and I even had a chance to chat to Brian McChrystal, who came second, I believe, in the full Ironman in Cork. So he obviously knows what he's talking about, and he even said the same thing to me, the fact that the bike course for this race is a beast. Like, that's the only way I can say it. And having done it now, I can confirm the bike course is an animal, and it deserves a lot of respect, to be honest. We'll get into it, but that was kind of the general consensus. Was the swim shouldn't really be too much of an issue depending on conditions, obviously. Bike is going to be murder, and then obviously the run's going to be a lot harder if you're really struggling during the bike course, which we'll get into it. But yeah, it definitely was the toughest section on the course. So what I did was I actually went home to my hometown in Wexford that night to go and see my family, have a bit of food, have a bit of dinner, catch up, and then obviously drive up with them the next day to the race. So Wexford to Dublin's about 2 hours, give or take. So the alarms were set that night for 4 a.m. in the morning. Early, to say the least, but yeah, I mean, I didn't sleep well at all that night. Like, the excitement was phenomenal. Like, the nerves were definitely there. I was feeling anxious. I was, no question that I had everything, that I packed my transition bags right. You really are making sure that you've come this far. You just really are second guessing everything to make sure you get it right, because you do only really get one shot at these kind of things. I know you can do another one in a few months' time, but they're expensive, and there's a lot of commitment goes into them in terms of travel arrangements and rearranging everything to actually get to these races. It's a big commitment, so you really do have one chance on the day to make sure you smash it. So Saturday, race day. Like I said, we were up at 4 a.m, nice and early, in the car, 4 a.m. on the dot. So we arrived in Dún Laoghaire at about 6:30. We were pushing it quite tight, to be honest. Looking back in hindsight, I would have liked to be there maybe 5:30, 6 a.m. at the latest, 6:30. I felt like I was kind of rushing, and it was building more stress than was necessary. But anyway, we got there at 6:30, and the conditions were absolutely magical. Just the most incredible sunrise over Dún Laoghaire Bay. Not a drop of wind. All the athletes walking towards the start line and getting in the wetsuits, like everybody's got their official Ironman cap on, and like, it was amazing, and it was magical. Like, just to be there with everyone who's just on the same journey as you are, to a certain degree. Like, everybody's fought their own fight to get to this start line, and it is an achievement to even make it to the start line. based on all the struggles and challenges that you do face to make it to the start and actually give it a crack. So yeah, look, the atmosphere was amazing, and jumped straight in the wetsuit. By the time I had double checked my transition bags, gave the bike a few tweaks, it was 10 to 7, so didn't really have much time to mess around. Got straight in the wetsuit, said some final goodbyes to the family, got a few pre-race pictures, and began to seed myself based on what time I thought that I would have swam based on my ability. So I thought maybe mid-pack was a good place to start, just based on the fact that it was my first race, and I didn't want the pressure of going to the top of the pack, but I also didn't want to be fighting through the crowds at the back of the pack. Now, in hindsight, and I'll explain why in a second, I would have placed myself further up the pack. But before I get into that, about 5 minutes before we're about to start. So the pros start at 7 a.m. and we start at 10 past, so about 5 past 7. Literally the most amazing conditions start to change. This thick, slow fog starts to roll across the bay, starts to roll across the water, and starts to cover all of the markers and the buoys, and 10-15 minutes later we can't see a thing. And it would have been incredibly irresponsible for them to just say, you'll be grand, and just send us out, because the swim is actually very dangerous in my opinion. And there's a number of reasons why, because of like rip currents and tides and obviously Mother Nature on the day, but you're literally fighting for the swim every stroke of the way, to have your own space, to overtake people. You're racing. Like this is a race at the end of the day, and since everybody's all mixed in together, you've got people who are trying to compete and people who are just trying to finish, but it's a very aggressive section. To be honest, I think the swim is very aggressive. A lot of people get black eyes, and a lot of people get boxed in the face during the swim section, and that was something I was conscious of. But to be honest, we ended up standing for about 50 minutes, I reckon it was. This was the longest 50 minutes of my life. I was in the zone, I was ready to go. I had trained for 9 months, like all of these things. I was ready to take on this challenge at long last. And to wait and stand there for 50 minutes with no water initially, luckily there was a few kind athletes shared some water with me, but that was a long 50 minutes. And in hindsight, like, I would have definitely brought water, and I will be bringing water for the full Ironman. Just while I'm standing and waiting, I think hydration is something I overlooked in the case of, delays or Mother Nature not cooperating for a bit before the race is due to start. But listen, it was what it was. It was another challenge to face on the day, and what the coordinators decided on at about 10 to 8 was to go for a shortened swim. Now, this wasn't ideal. Everybody wanted to do the full swim, and we'd obviously trained for the full swim, but it was either that or no swim. So to be honest, I was grateful that they even gave us a swim, and it meant that we were going to get wet, we were going to experience it. And yeah, look, I was grateful for the fact that we did get a chance to do the swim, even if it was half the swim distance. But I flew through it. I absolutely flew through the swim section. Now, that's why I say for future races I'm going to be starting at the top of the pack, just because I surprised myself how competent I was on the day in the water. I think I finished about maybe halfway through my age group for the swim section, which is definitely, looking back at times, it was definitely my strongest discipline between swimming, biking and running. So for future races, I'll definitely be seeding myself at the top of the pack, as well, because it's very claustrophobic when you're mid-pack. You're trying to overtake people, find your own space and find your own rhythm. I think it'd be much easier to lead the pack and really set your pace from the start. So to conclude the swim section, I managed to do it in about 19 minutes and 22 seconds. Obviously, if it was the full distance, I'd be aiming for probably double that, around the 40-minute mark. But like I said, this wasn't about timing for me. This was about just getting through the experience and enjoying it all. But yeah, that was the swim section. That's how it went. On to the transition to the bike. Now, when you come out of the water, you're like full of adrenaline. Everybody's cheering you on. It's 8 a.m. at this stage. The sun's started to come out again. Like, the music's playing. It's just an incredible experience where you feel so alive, especially in that transition phase. But look, with the transition, the goal is obviously to be as fast as possible. The clock doesn't stop. But I ran into the transition tent and got all my gear on and ran to get on the bike. Now, looking back at my times, just from a point of improvement, I spent way too long in transition. What I should have done in hindsight is, and these you'll notice me like looking back and bringing up these points where I could have improved on and where I will improve on, is whenever I came out of the water, I kept my wetsuit on, when really I should have been taking it off and beginning the transition while I was moving. That's what I've seen the other athletes do, and I reckon that would have saved me definitely a few minutes, at least 5 minutes. And yeah, as you become more competitive, obviously those 5 minutes can be massive. So that was just something I learned. But look, I was looking onto the bike section. I knew this was going to be the toughest part, but I was just so full of energy from the swim and so like relieved to finally be racing this race that I was just going to take it as it comes. And that's what I did. So going into the bike, knowing that it was going to be tough, and even from, like I said, speaking to one of the pros and even him giving it the acknowledgement of how tough it was going to be, I still didn't fully know what to expect. Obviously, I'd done a few training sessions up around there, but I didn't do the full course, so I didn't really know what to fully expect until I was actually going to experience it. And to be honest, I'll say now, I'll hold my hands up, I completely underestimated that bike course. Like, I'm talking completely. Some of the climbs were just phenomenal. I mean, people were getting off their bikes to walk up these things because they were so steep and they just could not even bear the thought of having to cycle up them. I promised myself that no matter what, no matter if people were getting off, no matter how steep it looked, I was not going to get off my bike for any of the climbs. And I kept that promise to myself. Was it easy? No. It was incredibly challenging. And I can remember one of my highlights of probably the whole experience, but especially for the bike course, was I was coming around the corner for what turns out to be the toughest climb on the course, and you're looking at this thing and it just seems to go on and on and on. And if you look to your left, you see Guinness Lake. So as I was climbing this thing, I was suffering so hard, and I can just remember looking over to the left and seeing Guinness Lake, just not a cloud in the sky at this stage. The sun shining, just out there, just doing what I love, and it was a magical moment. And I can remember making it to the top of that climb, and one of the coordinators, one of the marshals, goes, "Well done, mate, you just finished the hardest climb on the course." And I was just like, just absolutely buzzing. And I'm looking at this view of Guinness Lake from the top of the Wicklow Mountains, and I'm feeling on cloud 9. I'm about 60 kilometers in at this stage. So with the bike course, 60k in is when the hardest of the climbs are behind you. Yeah, look, by this stage I'm feeling relieved, and I'm also thinking, right, if I just finished the hardest section of the hardest part of this race, it's looking like I'm gonna finish this thing. Now, the highs didn't last that high didn't last too long, unfortunately. About 5 kilometers later, about 65k mark, I was stopped by a man in a high vis. So I was thinking, oh, what's going on here? Like, I was going pretty fast. Like, it must be urgent if he's telling me to stop. He stopped me and told me that I was disqualified. He told me I had missed the cutoff time by 8 minutes. Told me to hand in my number. And as I took off that number, I was just in a pure state of confusion, anger. Like, I'll go into it more, but I felt like ripping off my number was like literally ripping my soul from my body. That's the only way I can describe it. I challenged the statement as basically we had started the swim section an hour late, and I had studied these cutoff times. I knew where I was coming in time wise. But what had happened was they hadn't adjusted the bike cutoff times, even though we started the swim an hour late. So it was about maybe 12:30 I was coming into about 67k mark. If we had started the swim on time, I was literally like, I was absolutely flying. I was way within the cutoff times. But for some reason, whether there was a miscommunication there or whatever it was, or something to do with the roads had to be back going because of the guards. Because that was another thing I forgot to mention, was this is one of the few courses where they have closed roads for the entire race. So you're racing there with no cars driving past you, no traffic. It's just you and the other competitors, which is amazing on its own. But this moment of the race, he gave me two options. He said, listen mate, you can either get in the van and we're going to be driving back anyway, or else you can just finish off the bike course, but you're going to be disqualified. And I was just disgusted. I knew there had been a major mistake. Something in my gut was telling me that this wasn't right. Listen, I'm all for a fair race. If I had missed the cutoff time fair and square, I would have said, listen, fair enough, I gave it my best crack. It just wasn't meant to be today. But something told me to finish what I had started. Something just said, do you know what? I think there's been a big mistake here. I'm not going to challenge this now because it's a waste of time. And this man isn't moving. But that was a choice I had. He literally said, listen mate, you just hop in the van there now, we're going to be driving back. But I refused to accept that. And the next 30k was probably the darkest, most raw, emotion-filled 30 kilometers on a bike that I've ever experienced in my entire life, without a doubt. The emotions that I was feeling, pain, suffering, confusion, disappointment, anger, shame, all of these emotions were just rushing through my body, and my mind was just in this just haze of confusion and fog that I didn't know whether to laugh, to cry, I didn't know what to do. But what I did, and this is what I had trained for, I channeled all of that raw emotion into speed and perseverance for the last 30 kilometers. I flew that last 30 kilometers. And it just came down to the fact that, listen, I had started this thing, I had trained for it, I had paid for it, I had invested so much. No matter what, I was finishing what I started. If there's been a disqualification and it is what it is, I'll accept that. But I had to accept that there was a chance that I might have failed, even though I had decided to keep going. And look, this was one of the biggest lessons for me that I learned out there, because it taught me so much, and it relates so much to life. And I'll go more into it, but I'll finish this bike section first. So literally powered that last 30k where I finished the bike course, and as I dismantled the bike into transition, I just remember turning to one of the officials, like just with a glimmer of hope that I was still in the race, and I said that I'd been caught and I wasn't sure what the story was. And And she was like, listen, I wouldn't be too sure about that. Go and check in the tent. I'd say you're still in the race. I went into the transition tent, and as if by a miracle sent from the heavens, I don't know what it was. I told them my race number. I told them what had happened, and they said, listen mate, there was obviously a miscommunication, but you're still in the race. 15 minutes to the bike course because of the wet conditions that we were experiencing up there, where at the top we entered like a really cloudy section where it was very slippery and it was very dangerous. And so it turned out that me and the lad who had been cut were, I reckon, some of the last people to make it through that bike section. Just again, this raw emotion just flooded through it. The fact that I had gone through living hell up there, and now to be told that I'm back in the race and this dream that I've had and been nurturing for the last 9 months is alive and well, and I am just ready to go. And I can't even, it was just raw emotion and such a contrast of what I felt on the mountain on the bike to what I was feeling now. I was absolutely pumped. But I finished the whole bike course in a total time of 4 hours and 53 minutes. But I was still in the race. So got the bike gear off, got in my runners, got my compression socks on, and proceeded to run the final section. Yeah, it was just such an emotional point of the race. I had such a strong start because of that energy and because of that lift up, where I resurrected from the dead. And unfortunately the second lap wasn't as strong, and my body and mind did start to break down and become progressively worse as the race proceeded. By lap 3, about 2 hours into the run, I see my family in the crowd. That helps so much with lifting my spirit, and just even the power of a high five for that last lap. I can remember just one particular situation where I was coming into the last lap and I could see this girl like really struggling, and I just remember looking up to her. I had just such little energy left in me, but I looked up to her. I was like, we're gonna do this. I just high-fived her, and that lifted both of our spirits so much. And she was like, we're gonna do this. And it sounds ridiculous. It sounds like something so small, but when you've literally got nothing left in the tank, like you fully believe you're running on no fuel on the tank. So just the power of that high five made a huge difference. And even the support of the crowds, and yeah, look, that last lap was emotional, but just little things like that, I was amazed to see how big of a difference they did make to really lift your spirit. So I'm coming around the last corner for what's been just a roller coaster of a day. And by this stage, there's cars leaving. I see people walking past me with their medals on. I see people driving out in their cars, and I can just remember the last bit of section before you cross the corner to cross the finish line is this line of cars. And I can remember, it felt like I was in a movie. I can remember just suffering so badly, like literally it was almost like a fast walk at this stage. My legs had just completely given up on me, but I just kept digging deep. And I can remember just a line of cars, just one by one, just telling me to dig deep, like telling me to go for it. I'm nearly there, and it just gave me goosebumps. I felt like, I'm not ashamed to admit it, like there was times for that run section where I felt so overwhelmed with emotion that like I reckon I probably did like shed tears at least once or twice throughout the experience. But it's just emotion that you just don't feel in your everyday life, and it's beautiful. It's absolutely amazing. to experience those emotions. But yeah, look, just the support of the people that were there, they all know, at least if they're some of the athletes, know what you're going through. They know that you're in a dark place, and they can recognize that, and just that simple, like, you're nearly there, mate, it makes such a massive difference. But long and behold, I cross that last corner. I see the finish line that I've visualized for months and months and trained for and dreamed of. And against all odds, I'm about to cross it. I just start to slow down a little bit, to take it in, and really just cherish that moment that I've worked so incredibly hard for, and literally had to give up so much to be in this final hurdle, to cross the long awaited Ironman 70.3 Dún Laoghaire finish line. And I cross it, and I just feel, again, just a mix of just raw emotions. It seems surreal based on what's happened, and I just feel overwhelmed with just gratitude and relief, and it's hard to summarize, but the quote that comes to mind, and what, obviously, since I've had a chance to reflect, is, you know, the world belongs to those who persevere. And I just see the power of that quote so much, in terms of the setbacks I experienced with the training, the setbacks I experienced with the bike crash, with my health, with being told that you're disqualified when you weren't. I have checked with the official timing, and it's all been approved. I did officially finish the race, just to clear that up. And obviously there was a misunderstanding out there, but I very could have easily have accepted that failure on the mountain. I very could have easily said, you know what, look, I missed it by 8 minutes, oh well, and accepted that lift down the mountain, only to have found out that if I had have persevered, I would have completed it. But I'm so glad I chose to persevere. I'm so glad that I had trained my mind and visualized facing these challenges on the mountain, and to finish what I had started and not give up no matter what I faced. And I was so proud of myself. Like, I was just so overrun by the whole day as well, that I couldn't but feel this underlying trauma still from what I did face. Like, obviously a few months have passed now, and I'm actually glad that I faced what I did on the mountains, but I wouldn't wish that on anyone. I wouldn't wish anybody to be told that they were disqualified, and that their race and their Ironman dream was over and crushed due to a simple miscommunication and misunderstanding. That could have really ruined it all for me. But just the key takeaway lesson here, just to go back to that quote, the world belongs to those who persevere, and just never ever giving up and refusing to give up. That's what stood to me, and that's what will stand to me. So just to summarize then, I know it's been a pretty intense episode. I hope you are gaining value from it. I'm actually really enjoying sharing this story and sharing this experience. But just to summarize my overall thoughts of how the experience went. First of all, I completely underestimated the magnitude of this challenge. I didn't truly give it the respect it deserved. And to follow up with that, the roller coaster of emotions summarizes the experience perfectly. I experienced the highest of highs, and the lowest of lows, all in one day. I completed the entire race in 8 hours and 9 minutes. So the final cutoff time is 8 hours and 45 minutes. So I was well within the cutoff time by the end, but it was just, like I said, it was a roller coaster of emotions. That being said, I did also achieve what I wanted to achieve in terms of having a much better perception of what it will actually take to train, prepare, and complete a full Ironman. And that is the plan. Next year, whether it's around October, December, that is the plan, is to do the full Ironman distance. Now I know what to expect. Now I know what respect to give this race. And that's what I'm going to lead on to next for my final few points, is that I would highly recommend anyone who's considering doing an Ironman or getting into Ironmans, start with the Ironman 70.3, start with the half distance of the full one. Going into the full one, it's not wise. I see people go into the full one obviously for the challenge, but I think it's oftentimes more out of ego. It's more out of proving to themselves that they can do this ridiculous challenge without any real foundations or without any real experience. And if you do that, be prepared to suffer from start to finish. I mean, obviously, if you give yourself enough time to train and you do have that foundational experience, by all means, start with the full one. But if you really want to be in this for the long run, and if you really want to get the full value out of becoming an endurance athlete, I would highly recommend starting with the half distance for those reasons, to really learn how to train, how to eat right, how to train your mind, all of these things, because you're going to enjoy it more. And when it comes to the full one, then you're going to be much more prepared and you're going to be in it for the long run. And that's what it's all about. So that being said, I've outlined 5 tips for someone who wants to complete their first Ironman 70.3. The first one, start with your why. You really need to understand your purpose on a deep level of why you want to complete this challenge. It's far too difficult to undertake this challenge without fully understanding why you want to do it in the first place. Whether that's to get your life back on track, like it was for me, whether that's to raise money for a charity of your choice. Whatever it is, you need to get clear from the start before you begin anything to do with Ironman training. Number 2, train for time, not miles. I like to follow this tip up with build your training around your life, not your life around your training. I worked a full-time job from start to finish of this experience, and I still am working a full-time job. But if I wasn't able to build my training around my life versus the other way around, I wouldn't have been able to do both and perform to the best of my ability at both. But since I trained for time, meaning that I allocated time each day where I was doing the training, I didn't care how many miles I got done. Obviously, I had an amount that I would ideally like to get done, but I gave myself that time and I trained around that time instead of training around miles. And that's a huge tip that I think you should really take on board if you're considering doing your first Ironman 70.3. Number 3, train in the race environment at the weekends. So the brick sessions, as I mentioned, they were invaluable. Like, getting comfortable in the race environment for me is one of the most important things that I did throughout my training. Because like I said, it's all well and good, training indoors and doing your swims in the pool, but it's not giving you a realistic expectation of what to expect on race day, and it's not really going to build that confidence as strong and as solid as if you're consistently building in those race environment training sessions, and even better, incorporating some triathlon distance training days where you are getting your body used to doing those back-to-back disciplines in a racing environment. The 4th tip is train the mind. I hope this story and my story has shared to you the value of training your mind, and the 2 points obviously that I've discussed, or the few points that I've discussed around that, meditating, visualizing and practicing gratitude, they're going to make a huge difference. But please, if you do one thing and one thing only, make sure you're training the mind. Even if you're not doing it, even if you're somebody who's listening to this and you're just curious, make sure you're training your mind. If you don't have your mind right, nothing is going to go right for you. And that's true for all of your endeavors, whether that's your schoolwork, your career, having your mind right is probably the most valuable thing that you can invest in, and I know that it's especially invaluable for completing your first Ironman 70.3. Thanks again for listening to this week's episode of the Live Ultra podcast. I do hope that you enjoyed this week's episode. I hope you learned something, and I hope you gained value from it. And if you did, I would ask just one thing and one thing only, that you share this episode with one friend. That's really how the podcast is going to grow and reach more people. So yeah, if you could do that, and if you did gain value, I'd really appreciate it. Thanks, and see you in next week's episode.